It is time to talk up some Nebraska football here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. And to do so, we bring in Parker Gabriel. You can catch him on Husker Extra, where he does a fine job right there, and look him up on Twitter as well. That's certainly where I found him, and he does some exceptional work right there. Talking Huskers, Parker, we appreciate you jumping on board tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Mark. It's always a pleasure.
So we're going to fire up the live chat, and I would anticipate some healthy and interesting comments and questions possibly, but let's dive into the spring football sessions. Obviously, the spring game concluded things a couple weekends ago. We talked to you just prior to the spring game. You had some anticipation of what you wanted to see on that particular day. Just your thoughts about maybe not necessarily just the game, but what came out of spring and what you know about this team now that you didn't know a month ago.
Yeah, well, it was interesting. I guess the main point. Sorry, kind of froze up there for a second. The main point, I guess, there's an incredible level of interest around the program right at the moment because of Scott Frost's return as the head coach, and it was a moment. It felt like there was a little bit of weight behind it. I mean, the spring game's a spring game, but Scott Frost leading Nebraska out of the tunnel at Memorial Stadium with 86,000 people in the crowd was, if nothing else, a little bit more spicy than you get in a typical spring game setting. And I think about the team, more than learning anything totally new, it was more a reinforcement of maybe what we thought, which is Nebraska's armed with some pretty good offensive skill position. The offense is going to look a lot different under Scott Frost than it has really probably at any time in program history here, and quarterback's going to be a big question. I had all three young guys had moments where they looked good during the spring game, but none of them have had a single snap of FBS experience. So that's going to be an interesting battle to watch through the summer to see who starts September 1st against Akron.
So not just Parker taking the spring game into account, but the entirety of the spring practices. Who do you think helped himself out the most at quarterback?
Well, I think Adrian Martinez, the true freshman early enrollee from Fresno, California, he did nothing to diminish what the coaches think of him. He missed his entire senior season of high school ball because he tore his labrum. He wrecked his throwing shoulder pretty substantially, had an existing injury, was playing basketball, made it worse. Missed his entire senior year of football. And so for as talented a guy as he was, I think there was some question just about where he'd be physically. Late in spring, Scott Frost said he didn't think Martinez was probably all the way back in terms of the velocity throwing the ball, but he helped himself just in the sense that it looks like he can do it. And whether that's right now or in the future remains to be seen, but I'd say he helped himself just showing that he could compete with those guys. And then Tristan Gebbia is a holdover and is just a redshirt freshman, and I think he proved that he can play in this system, even though he wasn't recruited to play in an offense like this.
Mark Rogers TV, always talking college football. We are the voice of college football, and tonight we've got Nebraska followed up by Miami talk. Parker Gabriel from Husker Extra joining us to talk of the Huskers following spring practice. All right, a couple people out here on the chat. One of them wants you already to make a call on the quarterback position. Are you leaning one way, or are you going to give us maybe some odds, possibly, Parker? Hopefully Parker's still with us. Parker, if you can hear me and you're having any issues, just click out and come right back in, and we'll pick up the conversation.
I'm here. Sorry about that,
Mark. Very good. Very good. I don't know if you heard the question about the quarterback position. Somebody out there, Thomas, just a huge Huskers fan on my channel all the time, would like for you to prognosticate the quarterback battle.
Honestly, and he is like a lot of Husker fans probably sick of hearing this. I have no idea. I mean, I think they've been saying that they were giving the three quarterbacks who are eligible, Martinez and Gebbia, who we already mentioned, and then Andrew Bunch, who's a redshirt sophomore. He's a walk-on. They've been giving him even reps. I guess maybe the furthest I could go in prognosticating is that I would guess that Gebbia and Martinez are a little bit ahead of Bunch at this point, and that's mostly predicated on the fact that they played on the side of the ball in the spring game on the red team that had most of the skill position, what one offensive line. And so I mean, I don't think that the coaches have any idea what's going to happen. Martinez looks like he's physically able. He's big enough. He's bigger than Tristan Gebbia is to hold up. I know that's like sort of one of the things they want Tristan Gebbia to work on, is bulking up a little bit to handle the rigors of a Big Ten schedule. But honestly, it would be a complete guess on my part, and there's plenty of that going on around here as it is. So I would say Gebbia or Martinez, but I don't think you can count out Andrew Bunch just yet.
We've got a Martinez is the man on the chat right now. Looking at the offensive and defensive lines, obviously the hallmark of the program and its salad days, defensive line, offensive line play, and the great walk-on program at the time. Your thoughts about the line play, getting a question about line play on both sides of the ball.
Well, the defensive line is one of the deepest positions probably on the roster. It'll be interesting to see kind of, Mike Dawson, the defensive line coach, said that last year at Central Florida, they were rotating 9 guys through 3 spots. And so he said, if we've got 9 that can play, we'll rotate 9. If we've got 6 that can play, we'll rotate 6. And so they've got some guys. What will be interesting to me is the nose spot. They've got some guys. Damian Daniels, a redshirt freshman, a big kid, 325, who is a candidate to play inside. They've got some guys who aren't quite as big, Carlos Davis and Khalil Davis, twin brothers, juniors, who have played defensive end in their time here, but the staff thinks maybe can play all 3 spots. So maybe in pass rush situations or whatever, you see some of that, some of those guys. So that's got a chance to be a real strength. Offensive line, they've said, Greg Austin, the offensive line coach, has said that they have better functional depth here than they did when they got to Central Florida. But I do think that they're still searching a little bit on that. And they've got 2 young tackles, Brendan Hymas on the left, Matt Farniak on the right, both sophomores. Their top 2 centers were hurt all of spring, so that's unsettled. And then they've got 2 seniors right now slotted for guards, but depending on how center shakes out, that the interior could shuffle a little bit, I think, between now and the start of the season. So chance to be a strength, but Scott Frost said at the end of spring ball that offensive line, that they need a summer in the weight room more than maybe any other unit, and that they have the most to gain in that aspect too over the coming months. So critical summer for everyone in the program, but I think in particular, if you had to point at one group, I'd say the offensive line, trying to just beef up a little bit more between now and September.
Yeah, as you mentioned, off that defensive front, Carlos Davis coming off 42 tackles last season, 3.5 tackles for loss and 2.5 sacks. Parker, I believe this statement was made right after we talked the last time, and I was thinking, I wish I would have caught that before we talked, but it was the Nebraska athletic director just making a bit of an offhanded remark that caught a lot of attention concerning Urban Meyer and Jim Harbaugh being scared.
Yeah, running scared.
Ross taking over. So I'm sure that's causing a bit of a buzz. Both guys, probably Husker Nation, saying, go get them. Yes, this is the truth. We're ready to go. And others kind of cringing a little bit.
Well, it's interesting because he said that, and then he told the Associated Press that comment was made tongue in cheek, and I believe him. He was working a room and having some fun with it. I think if you were to get Bill Moose, honestly, he'd say that he would hope that was the case a little bit, and also I think he was making a joke to a room. But it's interesting because Scott Frost was on the radio for an hour the night after that coach's show. Last one, taking calls from fans and stuff. Last one for the summer here. Last time he does that until fall camp. And his message was very toned down. Yes, it was a good first step. There's a long way to go. And everyone who called in said, hey, coach, you guys look great in the spring game. Looks like you're making great progress. And he did his best to take those compliments, but he always followed it up by saying, that's really nice of you to say. I don't think we're anywhere near where we need to be. And I think that's the tone that he would have wanted to set out no matter what had happened in the spring game. But I wonder if it maybe was just dialed up even this much by what Bill Moose said the night before.
We got Parker Gabriel on the line from Husker Extra, doing a tremendous job. We've had him on 5 or 6 times to talk Nebraska football, and I have definitely needed the insight and information on the Huskers going forward with Scott Frost. So Parker doing a great job for us. Always appreciate the conversation. Moving to the NFL draft, there was a time and a day not so long ago for those of us who have been around a long time that Nebraska figured heavily into the NFL draft. Maybe not necessarily a pro ready-made type program at every position, but it was just so good at most positional units and so strong that it factored well onto the next level. Not so much the last 2 seasons, with one each in the 2017 and 18 NFL draft. So most recently, of course, Tanner Lee selected in the 6th round, pick number 203 by the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, Parker, when I think Tanner Lee, and this is completely unfair, the first thing that comes to mind are picks, interceptions, because he had a couple bad games in there and many not his fault. He had the 5 interception game against Purdue. He had a couple bad games early against Oregon and Northern Illinois in terms of throwing picks. And then that stuck with him. And then I know that I checked back later and he had a really good run through the last stretch of the season in which he limited the interceptions. And I'm sure the opponent and the receiver play and everything else played into that as well. So your thoughts about Tanner Lee at the next level?
Well, it's not unfair that interceptions come to mind because I think he threw 17 of them in 12 games. He did. You're right. He played a good stretch of football at the beginning of Big Ten play. I can't remember exactly what it was. I think it was 5 games or so where he went like 10 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, or 10 and 3 to start the Big Ten play. So he showed flashes of doing it, but he's never been able to play a full season of turnover-free football. I think in his 2 years at Tulane and then his 1 year at Nebraska, I think he was at 48 career touchdowns and 37 career interceptions in college. So, and then he turned the ball over twice in the Senior Bowl. And it just, he hasn't done anything to alleviate that concern in his game, but there's no 6th round draft pick in the NFL that's wart free, and so what you're buying at that point in the draft is the upside. He's got a big arm. He's 6'4". He looks the part. And I think Jacksonville, it's as good a spot as any for him. I mean, the quarterbacks they have on the roster are Blake Bortles, who obviously is the starter, and Cody Kessler. I mean, that's it. Those two and Tanner Lee now are the Jaguars quarterback core. And so, I'm not saying he's going to be starting week 6 or anything, but as far as the quarterback depth chart goes, you can't get much better. And then on Jacksonville's staff, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but Tulane's old offensive coordinator that he worked with now is a staffer, not an on-field assistant, but works for Jacksonville. So I think it's a good fit for him. For him, it's all about limiting turnovers and playing mistake-free or vastly reducing the amount of mistakes he makes. And it's not impossible. It's certainly not. I mean, everyone develops, but he's never, at the college level, he never showed for an extended period of time the ability to eliminate that part of his game. And so we'll see what happens over the coming years.
DeMornay Pearson-L is a player that early in his career at Nebraska caught my eye, caught a lot of people's eye, thought he was going to turn into a big star. And sure, he had his spurts, had his glimpses, turned in some really big plays, but very much leveled off. Injuries came into play. I don't know the extent of those injuries, but I know that he got nicked up here and there. And obviously the lack of playmaking ability at the quarterback position hurt him as well. Pick and choose, do whatever you'd like with the undrafted guys. So I just throw him out going to Washington as a guy of note that, I remember seeing a number of times thinking, man, this guy should be better.
Yeah, he's an interesting case among the unsigned guys because he said he was fully healthy coming off a bad knee injury. It was long before I was covering the team, but it happened at Purdue, I think 2016. And so or maybe 2015 even, 2015. And he said he was all the way back. He had a really tough time. I mean, he's a dynamic punt returner. And there was a long stretch this season where it was like when you go into a drought in baseball and you're down 2 strikes as soon as you get to the plate. That's what it seemed like was happening with him. He was catching the ball when he shouldn't, letting it bounce when he shouldn't, calling fair catch when he had room, trying to return it when he didn't. And he finally started to get on track a little bit as the season went on. So he's got some intriguing. He hasn't shown it recently, but he's got intriguing special teams ability. And then among the rest of the unsigned guys, this is a Big Ten West and Nebraska centered point, but Luke McNitt, the fullback here, told me that he had been in contact with the Atlanta Falcons for a couple weeks before the draft, assuming that he wasn't going to get drafted, and he kind of knew that that might be where he wound up, and he signed with them as an undrafted free agent right after the draft ended. And he's a really impressive kid, good leader. That's all that. And then he went to his pro day and he ran pretty well and did 26 or 27 reps on the bench press. So good strength. And he's one of those guys that between special teams and potentially having a fullback role in a professional offense, he seems to me like the guy that you'll look up in like 7 years and he'll still be in the league and you'll go, wow, yeah, Luke McNitt, he really made it work in the NFL. So if I had to pick someone to stick long-term out of the group, it would be the big boy from Kearney.
Well, that's the deal. We get used to watching the skill position players. We get used to watching the stars in college football and the guys that are very productive. But you only have 2 or 3 running backs, 2 or 3, 4 wide receivers on the field. You get the point that the slots are limited at the next level, and we don't follow offensive linemen typically as fans. That's first and foremost because they don't have stats, and then defensive line to a lesser degree and so forth. And then we see guys coming off the board and we're like, who is that?
Yeah.
Or he went to that little school. How could he be better than this guy that played in the Big Ten?
Right.
Well, there's a number of factors that go into that. Number one, he may be better right now. And number two, he may just project to be better. And then we see guys that hang around in the NFL for 7 or 8 years, and we think he wasn't really that good in college, but he's a fit. He coached up in the NFL, and obviously maybe he didn't play at a glamour position. So there's a number of factors there. And then we can certainly come up with a long list of guys that were stars in college football that just couldn't make the grade at the next level. Parker, we got people on the line that are asking about the running back position and who the top dog will be in September 1st.
Well, it's they got a lot of options at running back, and they sort of have been filtering through them. You got 2 senior holdovers from the previous regime, Devine Ezigbo and Mikhail Wilbon. They sort of got the first crack in spring, but Ryan Held, the running backs coach, said there's no more first crack because you're a senior once fall camp rolls around. So could they each have a role? Yeah. The most complete back in the limited amount that we saw in spring ball was Greg Bell, who's a junior and a transfer from Arizona Western Junior College. I don't know that he's got a total vice grip on the job, but he certainly is going to have a role. He was natural catching the ball out of the backfield. His junior college coach said that if he had wanted to play receiver, he would have been maybe the best receiver at Arizona Western. And they produce a couple Division I receivers, including a kid who's actually coming to Nebraska this summer. And then they have a couple intriguing guys coming in and joining the program over the summer as long as they get qualified. In Maurice Washington, who was the most valuable player in the Under Armour All-American game in January. And a sort of shifty kind of all-purpose back, Miles Jones from American Heritage School in Plantation, Florida, which was a high school powerhouse, undefeated. Patrick Surtain's the head coach there, and said, Miles Jones is about 5'9" and 170, and he said this kid's tough and he can do it all. So I would say Greg Bell's the top dog right now, but it will be by committee as much as possible unless someone really emerges. And then they've got 2 guys joining the program this summer that will be key. And then the wild card is Trey Bryant, who looked like a feature back early last year, but has had chronic knee problems, never been able to shake free of them. And did not practice at all over the spring. They're just trying to get him healthy enough to try to compete in fall camp. It seems like a long road for him. You hope, just for the kid's sake, that he is able to find a way back on the field, because he was a difference maker early in the season last year. But so if he gets healthy, there's another iron in the fire, but remains to be seen on that front.
Jumping back to the NFL draft storyline, some people commenting here. I also looked earlier in the day, and at that point, Drew Brown had not been picked up. There was speculation that the Giants would select him. Do we know anything about his status and your thoughts about his prospects at the next level?
I don't know exactly if he's come to an agreement with the team, but I do know that rumor or that smoke about the Giants probably was going to be a tryout invite. So it may not be as simple as whether he's signed or not. It may be an unsigned, it might just be an invitation to a mini camp. So that's where I would expect at this point for him to wind up. I know that there are other options out there. And I think over the long haul, kickers are interesting, right? Because it's the one position that you can keep getting better at without really playing. And so I think if he doesn't land with a team right away, he's got the leg and the potential that whether it's in, 2 months or 2 years, you'll see him in an NFL camp somewhere. But how quickly it happens and how much of a run he can make at a job, there's not that many rookie kickers that just waltz in and lock down an NFL kicking job. So I think he's got a professional career ahead of him, but whether it starts fast, I can't say just yet.
So this is at first glance and doesn't take into account pressure kicks or distance of kicks, but 12 of 14 this past season at 86%, coming off 21 of 27 his first year starting in 2015 and 12 for 14 the next season. So it adds up to 45 for 55, a nice tidy 82%, which is not outrageously great, but it's in the upper echelon of what you will see field goal kickers hitting at the collegiate level for the top guys. Probably, I'm guessing that's top 10 to 20 in the nation, because certainly there's a ton of college football teams out there that have their issues kicking. But if you can't go to the NFL and hit at least 80%, more like 85%, you're not going to keep a job for too long, because those guys are pretty darn good. We got Parker Gabriel on the line from Husker Extra, setting us up with Nebraska football and throughout the offseason as we head toward August camp. Parker, unless you have anything else for us, we'll let you go, but I appreciate you jumping on board.
Always. Anytime, Mark. Happy to be here.